Now, Brandon, like I said, I've been going back and forth on Twitter the last hour or so with our colleague Alex and his Gay Racing Podcast co-host Zach. And again, very good discussion. I think some good points being brought up all around here. But I want to start with a conversation that I think has been had over the last several years. And actually, again, just within the last hour, I got a notification David Land uploaded a new video asking, is the Brickyard 400 a crown jewel? Obviously, I haven't gotten a chance to watch it yet, so I'm curious to hear what his opinions are on the whole situation. But Brandon, I know you obviously think very highly of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and all the history there. In your opinion, given the context of what has happened with this race, again, I know Matthew Owens was on this show a couple years ago and talking about the statute of limitations on 2008, but we had the tire debacle all those years ago. We had a race against darkness in 2017 that left a sour taste in a lot of people's mouths. And then we have a finish like this today after we came back from a 3-year absence where this race wasn't even on the schedule at all. In light of all of that, do you think the Brickyard 400 deserves crown jewel status for the NASCAR Cup Series?
Well, it's certainly the crown is not shining near as much as it did since we last left it, especially seven. In my opinion, even with the darkness problem in 2017, to me that was like the last great Brickyard 400 that I remember personally. Maybe I have some delusions of grandeur. Maybe it wasn't as great as I remember, but 2017 and previous, that feels like the shinier moments of the Brickyard 400. And I told Matthew Owens, either him or you, I can't remember which, but that I think with the Brickyard 400 coming back now, it's nowhere near. Of course, it's golden days, but it's kind of in repair right now. So it's got some reparation. It's got some repairing to do through these next few years. I don't think it's going to be taken off the schedule at all. I mean, they just started it. They're so hyped about it. They've got all the marketing behind it. I don't think there's a chance it's coming off the schedule anytime soon. Now that they brought it back, and fans have been harping on it for years and years. But yes, it's definitely not. I have to admit, as much as I love Speedway Indiana and I love that track and I love the people that work there too. I mean, they're just some of the nicest people probably in motorsports. I haven't met too many people, but a lot of the people that work there, it's like a generational sort of thing. The people who wear those yellow uniforms. But as far as being a crown jewel event, it's definitely lost its luster for sure. But I think it's in repairing stages, and I think it could get back to a better state. How it does that, I have no idea.
Well, let me be very clear. I am totally sympathetic to people who want to argue this is the fourth crown jewel. I want to argue that this is the fourth crown jewel. I think for a while it was the fourth crown jewel. But what I can't wrap my head around, what I can't reconcile, is the idea that NASCAR thought that this race was so insignificant that they removed it from the schedule, or at least converted it to a road course race on the schedule at best for 3 years. If this were truly a crown jewel race, truly a top 4 race on the calendar that drivers and team owners and fans respect more than any other event, save for the other crown jewels, I guess, then why did we take it away? And I know the answer to that is going to be, well, the fans were talking about how much the racing absolutely stunk and how the grandstands were empty and everything. But I can't help but think back to those first 2 road course races. The last one that we got in 2023, I felt like was pretty straightforward, and Michael McDowell won that race straight up, all pretty much clean throughout. But the way those last 2 races ended, I just couldn't help but think to myself, as we were getting those constant crashes in overtime and 5 wide dive bombs going into turn 1, and the second year you had Ross Chastain taking the access road and coming back out and continuing to race for the quote-unquote lead after that. And I'm just thinking to myself, that the Brickyard 400 died for this? Are you kidding me?
Me too. Yeah, those were my same thoughts. And I was like, why? If it's so important, why did we leave it?
And listen, all due respect to AJ Allmendinger and Tyler Reddick and Michael McDowell, any win at Indianapolis is special. Don't get me wrong.
But they didn't win the Brickyard.
They did not win the Brickyard. They did not win it. I don't think anybody is arguing the Verizon 200 at the Brickyard was a crown jewel race.
Well,
and
the
and they
official record
shouldn't
will
have been.
hold that they did win the Brickyard as it was that year, but I
Yeah,
mean, it's not the same event.
it's and how do you like that? Like for people that, again, I'm with you that Indianapolis is special regardless of whether or not you're just turning left or you're turning left or right. It is a special facility. There's no argument there. You can go over to IndyCar. They run a Grand Prix on the infield road course there. In fact, and here's a perfect example. Alexander Rossi, at this moment, I'm sure his career is not over. He will continue to have a chance to add to this. But right here, right now, his last IndyCar win was at the IMS road course. Do you think Alexander Rossi thinks that his last IndyCar win is as special, as life-changing, as career-altering as his first IndyCar win was?
Not a chance.
That
Not,
would be
yeah.
that would be an absurd argument to make. You're exactly. So the road course, I mean, again, I'm not saying that it's not special to cross that yard of bricks as a race winner, but Kevin Harvick said it himself. It's embarrassing for our series that we have resigned ourselves to the road course, that we're not on the oval. And Harvick lost the last 3 years of his career. He lost an opportunity to add to his Brickyard 400 total. Denny Hamlin, this is the only crown jewel race that he's missing. They took 3 opportunities away from him in the twilight of his career to complete his crown jewel set. So I that's what I can't reconcile, that we took this race away, and now that it's back, and I hate that it ended the way it did, because we were setting up for an all-time classic finish. I mean, that top 3 with how Larson was closing, and if Blaney could have held him off, and then can Brad Keselowski do what Joey Logano did in Nashville and stretch the fuel farther than anybody expected he'd be able to? I mean, it had it all. And then we get a caution with 2 to go or 3 to go, whatever it was. And then we have an overtime restart. And again, I'm sorry, I'm dying on the hill. If we're going to do this, you get 1 attempt. I don't care if you wrecked in turn 1. I don't care if you wrecked coming to take the green flag. If the pace car pulls in, that is an attempt. And if you can't run 2 laps, then we're done. Because it just continues to spiral out of control. And the race couldn't even finish on network television. The 30th anniversary return to the Brickyard 400 had to get bumped to USA because of some, I don't know. I know it was a big news day. The big news broke 4 hours earlier, but we were hearing that some local NBC affiliates weren't even showing news. They were showing the local news or paid programming. It wasn't like it was Lester Holt coming on with breaking news, nightly news, national news. It's just a very messy situation. And just real quick, Brandon, it's a very messy situation. Obviously, you can point to start times as well. That's part of the conversation, but I hate that it ended the way that it did. And it, again, I think on what should have been a day of celebration, but that this race comes back, we're left talking about this instead.
Yeah, that does put a stinker on it, the 30th anniversary, but I know that phrase a lot. They'll say next is your local news, except on the West Coast. So that's where we saw that problem, was the West Coast. It wasn't time for their 5 o'clock news yet or what have you. So I think that's kind of a discrepancy there. That's the reason why they had the paid programming and stuff like that, because for the East Coast and Central, it was time for 5 o'clock news. And of course, the big news story of the day was going on, but it wasn't as much breaking, like we have to break the main feed. It was just, this is the time they told NBC that you would get your local news except on the West Coast back.
Yeah. And again, I have no experience working in television production. I know a lot of people that are on Twitter do, and some of them responded to some of our tweets saying, hey, this is just how it is. But again, and I'm just asking honestly here, I can think of several times where the 6 o'clock news has been preempted because a sporting event runs long. I can think of several occasions where, CBS has to push back 60 minutes because there's an NFL game running long. And I know that, the NFL is king over everything else. And, maybe that's a slightly different situation there. There are certainly bigger ratings at stake, but, and it works both ways. I'm sure there are regular loyal viewers of your 6 o'clock local news that would have been annoyed that a silly little car race that couldn't get finished was cutting into that. So I get it, but it's just, again, it's a very unfortunate situation how it all played out.
Yeah, and we had to go over to USA and record Law and Order SVU just to get the rest of the race.
Yeah.
That happens. That happened another time before this year. I think it was New Hampshire. Or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
Or it ended up becoming Law and Order SVU at that point.
Yeah. I miss NBCSN, and again, that's another constant source of frustration these days. Good to see our own Joe Samaniego in the chat so far. The Daytona 500, Coke 600, and Brickyard 400 Crown Jewel events have had lousy finishes. Hopefully, the Southern 500 is better. I saw somebody else make that point as well. You know, and they're absolutely right. In a season that has had a lot of memorable moments, you know, the Daytona 500 was a buzzkill. At least that one ended at 500 miles this year. And Brandon, again, you and I were talking backstage before the show. I talked with Zach about this a little bit as well, because in complete fairness, I think a lot of people say Daytona's lost its luster. When was the last time we had a green flag regulation finish of a Daytona 500?
Well, we were talking about it backstage before the show. I guess you have to go back 7 years ago to Kurt Busch and Stewart Haas winning in 2017. Is that right?
Unless I'm forgetting something, because 18 was marred by overtimes, and of course the controversial finish with Dylan and Almirola. 19, I think, had multiple. 20 obviously had multiple before the Ryan Newman accident. I believe 21 and 24 finished in regulation, but we got a wreck on the final lap. So we had the controversy of when the field was frozen. They gave the win to McDowell and Byron respectively in those years, but I think there were some Chase Elliott fans and some Alex Bowman fans that weren't quite convinced, and that was a whole mess. Kyle Busch will tell you he won the Daytona 500, and shout out to Brad Keselowski, by the way, because Brad Keselowski tweeted that he won the Brickyard 400. You know, so that happened in 23, and I think 22 went into overtime as well. So yeah, 7 years. 7 years it's been. So I don't know. I mean, again, I don't want to get too sidetracked here with overtime, because we could spend a whole nother 20 minutes on that. But I don't know.
Might have to start calling this grid overtime.
I don't know
fit a little more, huh?
I don't know about that one. But yeah, man, I don't know. I feel like normally I can pull my thoughts together and sound coherent and kind of draw it to a nice conclusion. I'm just, my mind still 24 hours later is just going a million miles a minute here. I feel like I've said a lot. I feel like there's still a lot to say. I don't know what I want to say though, as we're 15 minutes into the show. I mean, you know, it's very frustrating to be talking about an absolute buzzkill of a finish once again. And you know, Ryan Preece, to his credit, I think clarified this morning that he had partially run out of fuel as well, so that's why he couldn't get going. But again, I mean, if we're going to do this, if we're going to have unlimited overtime attempts, if Ryan Preece spins in and crashes in that spot of a track on lap 74, do you think they wait almost a full lap to see if he can get going before they throw the caution?
Look,
so why did we treat it differently? Just to see, and by the time they come back around, Larson's already taken the white flag.
Yeah, Ben, that's what I'm most frustrated about is the whole Ryan Preece deal, and just when they decided to throw the yellow, how convenient it was for Larson to be ahead. I mean, I can't make sense of that. We've seen it in other places where, I mean, in any other case, I feel like that would have been reason to do another overtime. By that same logic, I was waiting for yellow. We need to do another overtime.
Yeah,
and I would have much rather had another overtime than, why are they waiting to pull the yellow? Why, like he's clearly not going anywhere. Why are we keeping us in suspense? Like, why would you let the field get to the white flag?
And it was very reminiscent of 2017 when, ironically, the same Hendrick number 5 car, Casey Kane, was leading the race, and the field was wrecking behind him. I understand you had darkness to consider that year as well, but we didn't have that yesterday, so I think that added to fans' frustration. There was no reason they couldn't throw the caution immediately. I know some drivers were close on fuel, but you know, they waited for him to get to the overtime line, and then the caution came out, as we knew it would have to. We knew it was going to have to for Ryan Preece here. So again, it all just goes back to being consistently inconsistent. And again, this came up in our conversation as well. See, again, there's a million thoughts in my head, and they're just popping into my mind at random times here. But the Southern 500 came up, and I still remember, I think Shaun White gave the command that day, like, get ready for the final Mountain Dew Southern 500. They were going to take Darlington off the schedule, or at least reimagine Darlington's place on the schedule. And for 4 years, it was the Dodge Charger or Avenger or Challenger, whatever, 500. They took the Southern out of a name and then put it back in. Now it's back on its Labor Day date once again. So they messed with that tradition a little bit over the years. But again, I just would argue that was a mistake too. You know, if this is a crown jewel race, and I think the Southern 500 is certainly a crown jewel race, you know, I think it was a mistake to mess with it in that way. So, you know, again, I guess we truly are just resigned to being consistently inconsistent in this sport with how we treat our things here. But again, this is why I struggle with, you know, because I heard some people say, well, why can't we just have 5 crown jewels? You know, why couldn't we? Because people, I think, have argued for Spring Talladega, because I think if you had to pick a 4th before 1994, you know, a lot of people would say the Winston 500 or, you know, Talladega would be up there. But again, I know we're not a stick and ball sport, but tennis has its 4 majors, right? Golf has its 4 major events. I don't know that there's room for more than 4 crown jewel races, because when you start getting, I mean, if you go all the way up to 6, because some people would say, you know, if Homestead was still the finale, I think my friend Mikey was saying that as well. He at one time thought of the Ford 400 as a crown jewel, because Homestead always put on great racing. That's where we determine our champions. And again, Brandon, I see you're shaking your head there. I don't know if you have to agree with that, but I think there's an argument to be had that it means more than just a typical 1.5 mile race.
It sure did, yeah.
Used to mean more than it means now. You know,
but you'll never catch me putting Fall Phoenix as a crown jewel nominee.
And that's the counter argument, is the fact that we've moved the finale date. We've talked about rotating the finale date. You know, so I think Daytona 500, Southern 500, I'm with Dale Jr. on this. I would say World 600 at the bare minimum. Coca-Cola World 600. I wish they would put World back in the 600 name. Yeah. I think those 3 are non-negotiable. So what's your 4th? And if your 4th crown jewel race was at one time in not too distant history not deemed significant enough to stay on the calendar, I don't know. I have a hard time passing up on the Bristol night race in terms of, you know, what I get excited for, what I feel like is a special feeling when you see a driver cross the line and win that race, and what that race means, and how fans and drivers get excited for that venue and that facility. I don't know. It's hard for me to look at the Brickyard 400 in its current state and say, okay, what does this race have going for it besides the track that would give it crown jewel status? I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah, I mean, I'm being more and more convinced. I still think it's on the hospital bed right now of crown jewels, and if there's anything they could do to revive it, this was the first step to bring it back at least. But you got to get the tradition flowing again. And I want to be positive here. The crowds for the facility, given of how much it's able to hold, in my opinion, look pretty stellar for what we've called this race in the past, and for not having it for so long. I think that was a really solid crowd for what's been going on.
It definitely is. And look, I'm not saying, believe me, I'm not that delusional. We're not going back to 1994 when 1 million people wanted a ticket for this race, and literally twice as many cars as could start the race show. I mean, literally 86 cars tried to qualify for that race. Yeah. Like, we're never going back to that. Never going back to it. So I'm not saying we need to fill the facility to the brim with 300,000 race fans, and we need, 10 drivers going home that aren't qualified. I mean, we can't even get that from a Daytona 500 these days. It's just, times have changed. But this track, and this is the last point I'll make, and then we can move on to the series that we normally cover on this show. This track demands, scratch that. This track commands. It not only deserves, it commands reverence and respect that no other track can say is equal. Not even Daytona. when you think of Indianapolis on a world stage, and NASCAR being in a unique position that they are very rarely in, of being a guest of the facility. That's IndyCar's home. We are a guest of the facility when we enter those gates. And the fact that we have had so many controversial moments, controversial finishes, clown show finishes. I don't think you can deny those couple of road course races and double overtime chaos. I don't know how many overtimes 2017 went into. Probably should have gone into at least one more if we didn't have the rain delay that forced us up against the sunset clock.
Let's put it this way: if you're going to go to if you're going to go to Augusta National Golf Course, you don't need to go there and put on a dirt bike show. I mean, you don't need to go, make a mockery of the place by the performance you're putting on. I think Matthew, when I was talking about Indianapolis with him last weekend, I think he quoted this in one of his videos about this going on, of what Bill France said to all the drivers in '94 before in the drivers meeting about what they were about to do. It was like, you were on the world stage right now, and you were going to represent this whole entire sport, this whole company. Put on a good show. Like, don't, what you do here will determine whether we can even come back, sort of, in so many words. Like, he understood the magnitude of, you better not mess this up, because you can make a mockery of this whole sport in one day.
Yeah, well, and I still remember after the finish we got in 22, Matt, and I don't think he feels this way now. I know he doesn't feel this way now because I've gone back and forth having this conversation with him as well. But he tweeted after that finish, NASCAR should never be allowed at IMS again. They've made a mockery of this place and don't deserve to be there. And look, I mean, I can't say, I mean, I probably wasn't 100% of the way there last night. I've had 24 hours to cool down now. I would say I was probably 80% of the way there. And I still stand by what I tweeted. I said, listen, if this is how it's going to be every time we come here, where we're dealing with a controversy like this, and the finish leaves a sour taste in people's mouths, and you've got people that are screaming on social media that, oh, they held the caution for the Golden Boys, but they could give him the race, and I'm not buying into any of that. I mean, I think NASCAR has been consistently inconsistent for years on how they throw the caution flag in those situations. But if we're going to take the unlimited overtime crapshoot show that we put on frequently to Indianapolis, I feel like in a lot of ways we are making a mockery of Indianapolis, and maybe we shouldn't be there.
Yeah, you don't understand where you are. Don't bring your circus to Augusta.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And do it properly.
Yes, and again, we were about a minute away from having a very different conversation. Yesterday and tonight, and I think it would have been very positive. And I'm very glad that we're back on the oval. And I am fully with you, Brandon. I hope that we are on the oval for years to come. If we are at IMS, we need to be on the oval.
All it takes really is just drivers behaving. You can't get them to behave themselves, though. But all it takes is just realizing, okay, I'm not in a position to win anymore. Just behave themselves. Or if it was Ryan Preece that was running out of fuel, I don't know. I wish I could go back and see a replay of exactly what happened to his car. I don't know if we have that footage anywhere to look at online, but like, if you realize you're out of fuel, get off the race course. I mean, get out of the way. Realize it's over and get out of the way. There's some comments on your X post of where you said lots of positive and constructive discussion in the last 24 hours. I just wanted to say those as my closing bits. CPK Diecast commented, "The Brickyard is the McRib."
I saw that.
And then I Am Walt responded to that, said, "First thought was McDonald's was also the first car to drop out of the Brickyard 400. There's probably something ironic in there somewhere." That's Jimmy Spencer's 27 McDonald's car in '94.
Yeah, so I mean, again, I think
McRib. It's back.
Yeah, I'm happy we're back. I wish we could be having different conversations. But again, like I said this on Wrap Up yesterday, Mike Bagley put that poll out, and almost 3/4 of race fans selected unlimited when the options were 0, 1, 2 to 4, or unlimited attempts. And if he's giving you up to 4 and it's still not good enough, and you say unlimited, like, and 3/4 of the fan base is saying that, then I can't deny I'm in the minority. So I understand this is where we're at, but I mean, I don't know. Can we just, like, for crown jewel races, and again, I know we were talking about this backstage as well, Brandon. Bristol Night Race doesn't have a number of a name. Nope. You know, the spring race, or I know it was a Food City 500 for years. The entitlement sponsors change every year now, it seems. I think it's still Food City.
Food City has been very, very loyal there in Knoxville.
But that race implies 500 laps. The Bristol Night Race, the heck with it. Have as many overtimes as you want. I'm still not going to be a fan of it in principle, but I'm more okay with it there than Kyle Busch crossing the finish line at Daytona at mile number 500 and not winning the race, or Brad Keselowski crossing the start-finish line at the Brickyard in the Brickyard 400 and not being the winner of the race. That's just me.
To me, that's getting down to semantics. I
understand, but I'm just, again, for like, maybe we're already consistently inconsistent enough. Can we limit it to 1 attempt for crown jewel races only? Like, I'm trying to give you as many concessions as possible here.
I like that.
I don't want these races to fall into being, whatever the heck we got yesterday or what we've gotten at Daytona in recent years. Because I think, again, we're talking all about the Brickyard, obviously, because it was a Brickyard race weekend. But I think a lot of people feel the same way about Daytona. Like, look, this is supposed to be our biggest race of the year, and we're making a mockery of ourselves because we can't run so much as 2 green flag laps at the end of a 500-mile race. So there's a lot of nuance to this. There's a culture problem in the sport. I think it's not all, I don't even know if any of it's IMS's fault, but it is what it is. And it's just so frustrating that we were so close to a good finish. And yet we spent the first half hour of this show talking about the current state of the relationship between NASCAR and IMS, which is what we were talking about the last 3 years.
Well, let's put it this way. There's always next year, and we're about to hit 30 minutes here, so we might as well just call it a day.
There is. And I'll end it on this, and end it on a positive note here. I felt very similar with how the 2023 Indianapolis 500 ended. We came back this year, and I was saying to myself, as I watched the front 5 or 6 battle for the lead, battle for the top positions, I said, anybody in this top 6, I'm okay with winning this race. So let's just please go green. Let's not have to deal with what we had to deal with last year. And they did it. They got us a fantastic finish, and Joseph Newgarden went back-to-back, silenced any doubters he might have had from 23. Thoroughly deserving champion, quickly becoming a legend of Indianapolis. Hopefully we can have a similar conversation about the Brickyard 400 next year. One more thing before we move on. Let's get to Joe's comment here. Is it possible for a new race to get crown jewel status? NASCAR wanted Auto Club to be the new Labor Day tradition, but it didn't work. Where does the street race fall? I mean, Chicago's, I think, done a good job at becoming a big deal, but I don't think we're 2 years in. I think it's way too early to start putting it on the same level of all the tradition of Daytona and Charlotte and Darlington and even Indy. I mean, this was 30 years here at Indianapolis. And many, many more decades further than that for the actual facility. Chicago's city streets that they set up for a weekend, and we host a race there, and then they tear it down. And we've only been doing that for 2 years. I think it's got a long way to go before it even reaches, Long Beach IndyCar status, let alone NASCAR Crown Jewel status.
Yeah, it definitely takes half a lifetime or even a lifetime to even make a Crown Jewel. So nowhere near it yet.